to NOAA, which doesn't use the more up-to-date methods of data gathering and still maintains that there was a heat accumulation in the ocean. If there wasn't, then would you not agree with me that that does rather raise questions about the magnitude of the warming effect that our adding CO2 to the atmosphere is having?
Right. So is that an answer or a question?
That's a question. I'm asking you whether you agree.
Is that your second question?
Yes.
Okay, that's Lord Monckton's second question to you.
So he wants me to address this slide about ocean warming.
Absolutely.
Well, look, that's one paper. It's just come out. The thing about new papers is that in the scientific literature, a new result will get attacked and addressed and looked at. There's other people that have got different results, and I think if you just want to look at the overall thing here, if I can find it there, global temperatures, they're going up. And if you're trying to say, well, that proves sensitivity is low, well, then how come the temperatures are going up? The ocean data, that's quite uncertain. I suspect when that gets sorted out, they'll discover that the oceans have actually been warming and that paper is wrong, because there are other papers that say different things. And this stuff here, which has been looked at very, very closely, shows that it definitely is warming.
All right, well now it's your turn, Dr. Lambert, to ask a final question of Lord Monckton, and then this very eager audience, I'm sure, have got questions to ask, perhaps not as complex in their scientific formulation as some of that, but our last question from the stage.
Okay, where I have it here. This is addressing actually one of your previous slides when you looked at different trend lines in the warming. And I hope this graph isn't too technical. And the problem...
You didn't say lies, did you?
Pardon?
We don't call
lines.
Them lines. Oh, thank you.
He had several lines in the graph,
lines,
though. I think he actually said that those lines were lies. So,
thank you.
But anyway. So, yes, so you have a whole bunch of trend lines. Now, if you've actually studied, if you actually study the mathematics of working out these trend lines, when you calculate a trend line, not only do you get a slope for the line, how quickly it's increasing, you also, because of all the various ups and downs, you get an uncertainty in that slope. And that's what I'm showing you in this graph here. There's a black line shows you slopes, but what's important also is the red lines that show you the uncertainty in the slope that says, because of how much this data goes up and down, well, there's a slope there, but we're not really sure. There's just not enough data to work it out. And what this is showing you, we've taken the temperature data, quite similar to that, and I've worked out, well, actually I didn't work it out, someone else did, and I've just copied his graph, what the trend line is from a particular year to the present. So you can see, for example, there, starting at 1980, if you look up on the graph, you'll see that the slope is about 0.15. That's about the much warming if you work out a trend starting in 1980. And then the problem is, if you look at this graph, and what's wrong with this, is that as you go to a shorter and shorter time period, that trend gets more and more uncertain. And we can see here, if we just do a 20-year trend or a 30-year trend, you've got a good idea of the trend, and the red lines above and below it are reasonably close. So we can say, yeah, it's about 0.5, maybe it's only 0.1, maybe it's as much as 0.2. But once you get to short-term trends, like Lord Monckton showed us, the trend is uncertain. You can't say anything. I'm sorry, I was supposed to ask a question and I got carried away. Forgive me.
I'll take that as your question.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm very sorry. I just get carried away sometimes.
Which I have, in my usual self-effacing way, described as the great lie. And the reason why I do so...
See, I called it a line. He called it a lie.
Yes.
So just to be straight.
I'm not calling your graphs a lie. I'm calling the IPCC's graphs a lie. Is because what you may not do is apply multiple trend lines in this way. This is the UN's graph, not mine here. You may not apply multiple trend lines to a stochastic data set, one which jiggles up and down, apparently at random, even if it has a general trend upwards, and then draw conclusions about an acceleration in the warming rate, in this case, from the relative slopes of the different trend lines. That is impermissible. And I think, in fact, what you were just saying was agreeing with that.
No.
Oh, well, I'm afraid
No.
it is impermissible.
No,
and
it's
here is
completely
just
wrong.
one reason why. If we now look rather more closely at this graph here, where I've taken the same data set and I have started it, bringing it forward to the present, but starting in 1993, top left, 97, top right, 2001, bottom left, and 2005, bottom right, you get 4 different trend lines, this time indicating that we're heading for a new ice age. And clearly, if you have a completely opposite result using the same method on the same data, then there is something wrong with the method. One could also go back to the original one. You could draw a trend line, let us say, starting in 1905 and bringing it to the present, and compare that with one, say, starting in 1945 and bringing it to the present. And the one starting in 1945 would actually have half the slope of the one starting in 1905. Once again, apparently suggesting a slowdown in warming. Why do these different results occur on the same data set? Because you may not apply multiple trend lines to a stochastic data set. It is a fundamental and elementary error of statistics, which anyone in Statistics 101 would be familiar with. It is not permissible. This graph has been widely criticised, and rightly so, and it is not acceptable that the UN draws this particular conclusion from it. That is why the correct way to do it, and as I say, I had a question put down in the House of Lords to confirm this, is that in fact you have 3 parallel rates of warming at similar rates, caused perhaps by the cloud forcing described by Dr. Pinker, whose sex I inadvertently changed. I'm now happy to change it back again. But the point is still there, that these 3 parallel trends, they've happened at much the same rates over those 3 periods, according to the British Meteorological Office, whom the government went to get the answer to my question. And so what we're seeing is there are these periods of parallel warming, not an accelerated rate of warming. And yes, the temperature has been warming throughout the period, but not at a particularly alarming rate. If, for instance, we go back to the even before the Industrial Revolution began, to 1695, towards the end of the Maunder minimum, between 1695 and 1735, in a period of just 40 years, the Central England temperature record showed an increase of 2.2 Celsius degrees, compared with just 0.7 for the whole of the 20th century. And that was before the Industrial Revolution had even begun. So the idea that there is anything particularly unusual about the rate of increase in temperature that we see over the past 150 years in this data set is, to my mind, implausible in the extreme.
Thank you.
Could I respond to that, or
Sorry?
could I respond briefly to that? Or
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I've done Stats 101, and you're wrong. This is what the problem with your graphs is. And it shows it here quite clearly on this graph. If you do trends on short time periods, you have a huge band of uncertainty, and you get results that are all over the place. If you have a long enough time period, as in, if you can see here, we're looking to having to have about 20 or 30 years of data before we can say anything sensible about the trends, then the results make sense.
Right. Well, once again, in that case, you can't still come to the conclusion that they come to in their graph, because there is extreme uncertainty about the yellow line representing the last 25 years. Your own argument refutes their methodology. You can't do this with multiple trend lines. It's not an appropriate technique.
Okay. Well, now, now that we're opening it to the floor, it's time for the ordinary people in Struggle Street to have a say. And if I might, just while you're warming up, begin with a simple question to both of them, which most probably represents the concern that a stack of my listeners have anyway, and that is to ask both people, and perhaps Dr. Lambert might like to ask it first. Let's assume for a moment that CO2 is this dreadful scourge, or as the federal legislation here says, it's a pollutant. Let's assume that is the case. Then can we inform people here of one simple fact? What percentage, therefore, of that CO2 which is warming the world, the planet, what percentage of that is naturally occurring? Because governments are contemplating very draconian and punitive legislation, which is likely to rip the guts out of national economies. which of it is occurring naturally and which of it is man-made,